In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the power steering pressure line / hose on this Ford F-150. Let's get started. To access this power steering line, you'll want to go underneath the vehicle in the front, right behind the front bumper, on this cross member of the frame. On top of it is where this line is located. We have to remove this little shield that allows the oil to drain from the filter instead of it going all over the place, but the line actually goes underneath it right here, so we have to get this out of the way. Two 8mm bolts. And now you can pull this out. Now let's disconnect the line off of the power steering rack. There's a 10mm bolt right here that holds it on. The reason I want to start with this is so that as we work and disconnect everything else, this can continue draining. There's going to be fluid in the system, even if you empty the reservoir. So when it comes to doing power steering lines, I just disconnect the line and let it drain through the line, because like I said, there will be fluid even if you drain the reservoir. Get a collection bucket, aim it in the general vicinity of where you think it's going to drain. Grab your 10mm socket, and let's break this bolt free. That out, set it aside safely. So I'm going to try and scrub off some of this debris here before I completely pop the line off. I'm trying not to contaminate the power steering rack. That's better. All right, now pull this piece off, which is just a bracket basically that holds the lines in. Okay, perfect. Pull the line out. Like I said, fluid will come out, and this bracket will stay connected to this line, but that's not the one we're replacing, so we're going to set this one aside and pull out this line, which is the one that we are replacing. Perfect. Now we can let all of this drain while we disconnect the rest of the line. However, I will cap off the power steering rack because I don't want debris getting in here. I don't care so much about this line here. I do care about this one, so I will cap this one off as well, but everything can drain through this line. Debris can get in here. I don't care. Obviously, we're replacing it. Wipe any extra debris off of here. Perfect. That's nice and clean. I'm going to do the same on this line. And I have some rubber plugs laying around. I'm going to use that to plug up the holes in the rack. Okay, found a plug that fits in here. All right. Now I can work safely without worrying about contaminating the steering rack through these portholes. Towards the passenger side of this line in the hose, if you follow it, not only do you see this bracket here that we have to unbolt, but before we do that, let's get this sensor out. This is a pressure sensor. Get this out of the line, disconnect it first, because we'll have to swap this to the new line. Pull back on this locking tab and wiggle the connector off. There we go. If this happens to you, take out this red piece. This is just a plastic bracket that's supposed to actually stay inside of the connector part. As you can see, this came apart, so let's fix that really quick. It's important that this stays waterproof. You can see the rubber gasket also came off. You have to put this on first, like that, and then this red piece needs to slide over, and then you want to push it in all the way. There we go. That's what it's supposed to look like once you pull it out. This should just be a hollow connector with a few pins in it. So set the harness aside, grab a 14mm, put it right around the base of it, and we'll see what we can do here. We might have to put this in the vise. Sometimes you can get it off with it still on the vehicle, other times not so much. Yeah, this is just, it's severely twisting this line. Oh, I broke it free. Perfect. Well, there we go. See? Sometimes you can get it off with it still mounted, which is ideal because you can get this out of your way. At this point, I'm going to just use some pliers very gently on this larger part. Don't crush it, just use that to turn it. There we go. Once it's completely broken free, you should be able to spin it off by hand with no problem. All right, more fluid comes out. There is a an O-ring here, rubber O-ring. Make sure that comes out with it. If it doesn't, it's probably stuck in here. I suggest replacing it. If it's still good, I guess you can reuse it. But if you have a leak later on, you'll have to come back and replace it anyway. So you might as well replace it now while you have it out. And now since we're here, let's take off this 8mm bolt that holds on that bracket. All right, perfect. Continue following the line. You'll see a 15mm nut that attaches it to this bracket over here on the engine block. Break this free and remove the nut. And with this mounting nut off, we should be able to pull the line off with the bracket. We'll have to separate the bracket later. There we go. That's off. Get this bracket out of the way. Now I'm going to take the oil filter off to give myself some more space to work in this area here. Power steering line goes right up and above it. You might need an oil filter wrench to get the filter off. Have a collection bucket ready. Oil will most likely come out of it. And set it aside safely. Try not to get debris in it if you're going to reuse it. And of course, while this is wide open, try not to get debris in there. At this point, you have two options. One, you can remove the belt and the power steering pulley with a special power steering pulley puller, and then get to this fitting right here with a wrench from the outside here. Or what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the line right here and then put a socket right over, because when it comes time to reinstalling the new line, it comes separated. You get a new fitting and the line, you thread the fitting into the pump, and then you press the line in and it just snaps in place. So it's going to be a lot easier to install than to uninstall, which is why I choose to just cut the line, put a socket on, and a socket will also give us way more grip on this rusty fitting than an open-ended wrench. You can do this multiple ways. You can use a small air reciprocating saw, a hand saw, some cutters, if you have cutters that'll cut through this, whatever you have, but get this off of here if you choose to go this route. I'm going to attempt to use the cutters first. If it doesn't work, I'll just switch to a hand saw. Perfect. Now we have clear access to the fitting over there. Now take an 18mm socket and put it over. You might have to hammer it on depending on how flush you cut this line here. As you can see, I'll try to show you. Mine is not perfectly flush. It's got a little bit sticking out there, and that's what's preventing the socket from sliding on, because it's a little bit wider than the cutout on the fitting, but that's all right. You can just I'm going to try a 19, even though I believe this is an 18. The 19 might fit better, at least to begin with. So the 19 went over. I'm going to try to use the 19. All right, break this free. All right, here we go. That took quite a bit of force. So I guess the 19 did work. Now whether this fitting is actually a 19 or an 18, I will determine in a second for you, but as of now, the 19mm works. With a long extension, you can reach it from underneath, and there you have it. That's off. The fitting's in my socket. And there's the fitting. That's exactly what it looks like. So this is the line, that's the fitting. Looks like the plastic gasket came off here, so that's okay. We have new O-rings that are provided, and this is basically what I was trying to overcome here, to squish this part of the line down to make the socket fit. And although I was right, it is an 18mm. This is an 18 socket. It fits perfectly over, but when it comes to getting it over the line part here, you're better off with a 19 and smashing it on there with a hammer. It should grip enough to break this free. So there we have it. Let's do some cleaning. Let's do some cleaning. Make sure there's no debris here where the fitting goes in. And then we'll thread the new fitting on. Like I said, the line snaps into the fitting at the end once we're done. This is the new fitting. It comes with the washer, plastic gasket washer looking thing. And this is a 19 millimeter now. It's not an 18. Well, we still ended up using a 19 on the old one, but just so you know, a 19 fits on this one. We'll thread this part in, and then inside, as you can see, has a little locking ring. That's what locks the line in. So this is just so you can get a better view of it before I put it in here. Line it up with the threads and start it by hand. There we go. That's started. Let's get this bottomed out. That's bottomed out right there. I'm going to take a shallow socket with a swivel now so I can get the perfect angle on this fitting. There we go, just like that. This will allow me to make it nice and snug. Oh yeah, that's nice and tight. Just bottom it out. Give it a little extra with medium force until it stops turning. Basically, you just want to squish down that plastic gasket in there and ensure that it makes a nice tight seal. So once it bottoms out, between 1/8 and 1/4 of a turn should be perfect. It's going to be almost impossible to torque this just because of the space limitations, so that's why you're going to end up having to do it by feel, most likely. Now to transfer these brackets over, it's easiest if you can put your line in a vise. If not, just hold it with something. And these brackets loop over and then hook into themselves, basically. We have to pop out this hook. The easiest way to do it is with a little pry bar and a hammer or a screwdriver of some sort. Basically, we just want to open this up. There we go, kind of bend it out of the way. Once you do that, you should be able to stick the prying device in here, pry this open. Try not to break anything. Obviously, we still want these to be able to secure after we're done. Slide this out. You're going to want to also take the rubber grommets here, rubber insulators. Okay, set those aside. So there's one. We'll do the same to this other one over here. Same style bracket, but this one is slightly different just because it has this hook over here that basically locks it into the frame in a certain position. Open. Let's get this out of here. Perfect. The only other thing you're going to want to take off of here is this other circular rubber piece, this insulator that goes around the line right where the sensor goes, the pressure sensor. And all this does is it basically spaces the line off of the vehicle's frame. Otherwise it would rub and eventually it'll rub through, and obviously that's not good. So you want to use this on the new line to protect it from damaging itself onto the frame. I got the new line clamped in the vise. Let's get this bracket back. Make sure it faces the same direction as the original. And of course you can still rotate it after, but you can't flip it around unless you pry it open again. To close this up, it's easiest if you just use some pliers and squeeze it. Of course, don't crush the line though. Just like that. And it's going to be somewhat difficult to get this hook to bend back. If you can't, just make sure it's squeezed on here nice and tight, and that's okay if this doesn't go back in, as long as this is secure. This thick metal bracket isn't going to just open itself up like that easily unless it's pried open. So you'll be safe. And now let's put the other bracket back. When you clamp this line in your vise, don't crush it. Obviously, it can easily bend, and you don't want to damage this. Put the rubber grommet back, and now make sure you're putting this the right way. So it was facing towards me in the vehicle. I'm going to try and do the same thing. Okay, make sure this rubber grommet is properly positioned. That way the metal bracket squeezes on the rubber, not directly on the line. Once you get it approximately where you want it, make sure it's on the right stretch here, not on the other side of one of these bends. Make sure the rubber is centered up. Squeeze it shut. Perfect. Just like that. This hook actually went over, so since it did, I'm going to lock it in just like that. All right. Like I said, this still moves around. You can adjust it up and down and spin it, but you can't move it past a bend at this point unless you unclamp it. We're trying to avoid doing this too many times because, well, as you might know, metal has a limited number of times that it can move, and you don't want to move this back and forth too many times because it will break. Now bring your new line in here. Try not to get any debris in it. This end is not capped off. I do have the other end capped off though. Try to route it approximately where it went before. Once you get it in position, we'll snap it into the fitting. That's it. It's locked in. If you pull on it, it shouldn't come out. It will pivot and turn, but it's not going to come out, which is exactly what we want. And at this point, we can put the oil filter back so that we don't have this open more than it's necessary. I'm going to take a rag, clean up the housing, the oil filter housing, make sure there's no debris anywhere, not on the threads, not in here, not on the bottom. Perfect. And if you think you got any debris in the oil filter during this procedure, definitely replace it. It is not worth putting back with debris in it and potentially damaging your engine. So take the filter, oops, oil's coming out, line it up, make sure it threads on nice and smooth. You definitely don't want this cross-threading. It should spin freely, just like this. Then once you bottom it out, it shouldn't take more than half to 3/4 of a turn to get it tightened up properly. Don't use the oil filter wrench to tighten it. You do risk over tightening it if you use that, so just grab it by hand. There we go. I'm going to stop right there. Now let's get this bracket resecured on here. Line up the rest of it so it kind of falls into place. And let's resecure it with the 15mm mounting nut. Okay, make that nice and snug. You don't need to crush that down completely, just enough to secure that bracket in place properly. Now let's come over to the passenger side. I'm going to line up this bracket first, right onto the frame right here. And I'll put the 8mm bolt in, clamp this down. That's nice and snug, perfect. Now since we're here, let's get the pressure sensor reinstalled. Once again, if you need a new O-ring, this is the time to replace it. That way you don't have a leak. And it's important that this takes a proper reading, and a leak would prevent that from happening. Make sure that's nice and snug. Because I don't need to tighten it down a lot, I'm just going to use pliers to give it a quick snug after it's bottomed out, not even 1/8 of a turn. All you need to do is just put some pressure on that O-ring to lock it in and seal it up. That's all. I'm not going to bother using a wrench because it doesn't need to be that tight. Now, let's get the connector, line it up, and when you press it in, you want to make sure it locks in. As you can see right now, it didn't click, so it's not locked. There we go. That clicked, locked in, perfect. And if you remember this piece, this is the rubber ring that went around the line here to prevent the line from hitting up against the frame. This is just a spacer in case over time it does fall down just like this. It supports it. And back to the power steering rack. I'm gonna wipe off any oils and debris that's right here before I pull these plugs out so that nothing gets inside. All right, now I have a clean surface to work with. I'll wipe it off one more time to ensure. And now the fluid in here will keep leaking. I'm going to try and soak up some of it. That way when I put the line in, it doesn't squirt out and get all over the place under the gasket. But most likely it will keep leaking. This line, the new one, I capped off at the end. So I'm going to take the rubber plug off. This other one with the bracket, I also put a plug on it. So let's unplug this one. There we go. Now on this new line, you're gonna have to put 2 new O-rings that are supplied with it. The first one is kind of squared off. It's not round. Slide that over, make sure it's flat. Once you have that one in, take the regular looking O-ring, put that one also. All right, there we go. I'll make sure that that one goes underneath the squared off one. So squared on top, round on the bottom. Now move this line out of the way without getting much debris in there. Slide this one in, bottom it out. It should click into place, and then slide the bracket over and line up this one, press that one in. If you need to replace the O-ring for that one, now's the time. Make sure everything is nice and centered here. Make sure the bracket sits flat on the wider part of this bracket, not on the beveled edge that sticks out. Let's get that bolted and lock them both into place. Okay, that's bottomed out right there. I'm gonna give it an 1/8 of a turn. That's perfect. It just needs to hold this bracket on here, and there we have it. Now let's get this plastic shield back in place over here. Slide this over the line, line up the 2 bolt holes. Okay, once this bottoms out, just make it nice and snug. If you make it too tight, there we go, right there. If you make it too tight, you'll crush this plastic piece and, well, it might fall off at that point if it's completely cracked. All right, there we go. Now we can fill up the power steering fluid. Since we had the oil filter off and some oil came out, it's always a good idea to check the level at the end and top it off if necessary. This yellow dipstick is your engine oil dipstick. Remove it, wipe it off as you pull it out, stick it back in all the way, pull it back out without wiping it, and look at the oil level. If the oil level is close or right at the full mark, you're good to go. If not, add oil as needed. Between the low and the full mark on this dipstick should be about 1 quart of oil. So if you're 1/4 off of the full mark, add about 1/4 of a quart. The oil type that this engine takes is 5W20. Once you're done, put the dipstick back in. Now let's fill up the power steering fluid reservoir, and it's located right next to the air filter housing on the driver's side of the vehicle. Remove the cap. If you're unsure of what type of fluid to use, refer to your owner's manual. And as you can see on the side here, has a minimum and a maximum line. These you're going to want to pay attention to at the end when we're done with the procedure. For now though, I'm going to fill it up most of the way. I'd say to right about here where this text is. That is because we need to bleed it. There is a lot of air in the system. Obviously most of the fluid has drained. So if you need to use a funnel, do that. If not, pour in enough fluid until it reaches the top almost, and then I'll run you through the bleeding procedure. As you pour it in, it will bubble, and you'll hear it and see it most likely. That's normal. All right. I'll just leave it like that for a minute. Let it sit, let it naturally run down into the system, and the air will naturally want to rise up, of course. Now don't start the vehicle. The bleeding procedure that we're going to do is going to be with the vehicle off, the engine off. You don't want the power steering pump running because most likely there's air in it. So you don't want it to circulate the air, you want it to circulate fluid. So what we're going to do is with the vehicle off, raise the front end off the ground so the tires don't drag and scrape the ground. And then we're going to turn the steering wheel all the way to one side and then all the way to the other side. Fast or slow, doesn't really matter. However, the faster the better because it will forcefully push the air out manually without that power steering pump running. Now from inside the vehicle, turn the steering wheel left and right. Suck down most of it, so let's add more. And repeat the procedure. At this point, If you don't notice any more air coming out, you can start the vehicle and run it, and then make sure it's filled to the proper level, that level being this maximum line over here. And once you're sure of that, cap it off, take it for a road test. If you hear the power steering pump whine, it's most likely because there's air in the system. So shut the vehicle off, let it sit. The air will naturally bleed out over time. After 5 or 10 minutes, start it back up, and you can do the left and right steering wheel procedure again with the engine on. That should remedy the issue.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.